Okay, thanks. Thanks, Aaron. Good to see a lot of familiar faces here, and great to be presenting today. Honored to be the first official present, I guess, customer presentation. Although I had to kind of wear some look in the closet and get some old Fedora repository swag T-shirts in order to get that time slot. So thank you, Aaron, uh, for that. It is getting a little rough, so probably time for a new shirt. Okay, so I'm with the National Library of Medicine in the U.S. and put together a presentation here describing where we are in our journey to migrate to Fedora 6. And here I've listed some of our fellow team members who've helped with preparing content for this presentation, our product owner, Jennifer Gilbert, and a couple of our developers, Calvin and Andrew, who have kind of focused a lot on our migration. Okay, so outline of this talk, I'll talk about our system generally, provide our target architecture that we're moving towards, describe what we're doing for data migration, kind of what we've found so far in our explorations, talk a little about how we're planning to ingest new content going forward into the new architecture, describe our indexing, our target indexing, which is still in progress, and some future directions. And here is a screen snap of our homepage. It's NLM Digital Collections, and there's the URL. Okay, so our description, this is NLM Digital Collections. It's kind of the front door for our digital repository. That's the public-facing name of the site. Our system provides access and preservation. We're actually mandated to preserve this content by the U.S. Congress for the life of the Republic. So as long as the U.S. is around. We've been a long-time Fedora user since 2009. We're still primarily on the last in the Fedora 3 line for our main repository, 381. We do have another repository that has already been migrated to Fedora 6. And a couple of our colleagues here at NLM presented on that last year in the 23 Fedora showcase. So we already have some experience with Fedora 6. Now we're in the middle of addressing the challenge of migrating our main repository, which is much larger and much more diverse. Generally, on top of Fedora, we're using Blacklight as our main user interface with a bunch of plugins and customizations to support different kinds of content. Videos and PDFs and still images and books and so forth. We're using Universal Viewer primarily, but other content-specific viewers as well. Blacklight sits on top of Solar, of course, for those of you who are familiar with it. And we have been using IIIF for a very long time and recently switched over to a serverless implementation of IIIF in AWS. Right now, we're at about 6 million objects, and one copy is maybe getting close to 200 terabytes, where we are starting to get quite a lot of film. And so I think that is going to expand rapidly. And so one copy is maybe getting a bit close to 200 terabytes, and we have 3 copies. Our repository is the backbone that serves several public systems at NLM, including digital collections, which I've described. And here's another screenshot on the right, showing the Blacklight user interface that we have with a search and kind of typical facets that you see. We also support other systems at NLM directly from the repository, Profiles in Science, which sort of is kind of a repository in and of itself, but focused more on highly curated biographies for innovators in public health, life sciences, that kind of thing. We have court cases from FDA, which are kind of interesting to read from decades back. And our index cat citations, this is a separate repository because it was kind of a unique data model. And that already has been migrated to Fedora 6. And we have a presentation from last year in the 23 showcase. Our system has integrations with a lot of other systems here at NLM, primarily archive space, which we just heard about. So glad to hear a bit about that. Spotlight is used for our Profiles in Science system. That kind of allows you to build curated web pages, sits on top of Blacklight. Alma is our ILS, and then we also push content out to the Internet Archive. And we have more integrations as well. These are our primary ones that we have to maintain as part of this re-architecture. In terms of content, we have the majority of it, maybe even vast majority, is books, digitized books, 5 million pages. That's most of our objects, our page objects. We have a lot of diverse content as well, a lot of moving images, and again, the film is starting to really accelerate, and certainly by size, film makes up the bulk of, or moving images make up the bulk of the capacity, although probably book pages are, in terms of logical objects, are most of it. We have a lot of citations I talked about, still images. They're fun to look at, images from the history of medicine. We've done a lot of born digital recently over the last several years, kind of gray literature coming in. We have we dabbled in historical software, and I hope we can get back to that. Not quite as much as what you see on Internet Archive, where you can play games, your old games from the 80s, but we have one. And we are getting we are also accelerating archival documents. We're getting a lot more of those coming in, and we've also started handling recently oral histories in our repository as well. Okay, here's a couple of our interface examples in our user interface for a moving image on the left, and an archival collection on the right. And so we had to do quite a lot of customization to our Blacklight UI and to Fedora as well in order to model this content. And so the hierarchical content on the right, the archival collections, was especially interesting. That's coming from an EAD, excuse me, out of archive space. So representing that in Fedora is interesting, and so we'll need to maintain all this going forward. A couple other content examples, just grabbed still images of some unique content we have. So our stuff goes back hundreds of years up to the present day, right? From Gene Kelly on the left up to World War II cartoons, from the people who did like the Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny cartoons, up to kind of current literature and AI. So why are we re-architecting? Well, there's several motivations. Primarily, the motivation is it's just a lot of stuff is older versions, and we need to upgrade just to maintain current support. Security is very, very big. We're federal government, and so we spend an awful lot of time having to make sure things are compliant with security. And so if we don't, then what happens is the Grim Reaper out there on the right is going to come for us, and they've tried coming for us already. So we're holding them at bay. Specifically, we're looking to modernize our core backend stack is still Fedora 3, and we're still using the good old G-search to index stuff into Solr. We are very interested in OCFL, and so want to move more towards that. I think it may take us a couple of hops, which we'll get to in a sec. We do have an on-site data center at NLM, and we plan on keeping it. It's going to help us, I think, for our preservation posture. And our content originates on-prem. It's either digitized on-site at NLM, or we get it from digitizing vendors. And so we plan on keeping part of our architecture on-prem. And as I'll describe in a bit, we probably will reuse our existing pipeline for a period of time while we migrate to Fedora 6. At the same time, NLM is moving to the cloud. We've already, for several years now, and we use several cloud providers. Primarily, it's AWS, but we also use other cloud providers. For this project, it'll probably be it's mostly AWS. We have already migrated our user interfaces to AWS within the last few years, and so the interfaces I showed already, those are already in AWS. Our Fedora is still on-prem, and so we plan to have part of our architecture in AWS and on-prem, and so I think that'll help for preservation. Having our more stuff in AWS should help with scalability and resilience, all the typical reasons one moves to the cloud. And so that's why it's a hybrid architecture, as in the title. There is a burgeoning Fedora 6 AWS reference implementation. So thank you to Josh and the Badal and the team at AWS for working on that, and we're playing with that now. It looks great, and so we're hopeful that that will accelerate our timeline moving to Fedora 6, and I hope to hear more about that perhaps later in this workshop in a day or two. So here is our target our target logical architecture. We're not there yet, and the way data flows in between them. And so you see that there are a couple firewalls in there. On the left, it's what we plan to keep on-prem, and in the middle is what's going to be in the cloud and AWS. And so on the left, we still plan on having our ingest processing code. This is all the code that, and I'll describe this more brief and shortly. This is all the code that we have that takes in content and creates derivatives and organizes things in terms of objects and resources and so forth. And so we're going to try to keep that as much as we can. Keep a full copy of our content out on the left there, certainly masters and probably derivatives as well. And then what's kind of new here and interesting is sort of what we're going to do in AWS in the middle. So we're going to have Fedora 6. We already have this running in a couple of test environments. Looking kind of at the top row there in the center. We plan to have Fedora 6 kind of managing all this stuff still, as it does now in 3. And then we're going to index content into Solr from Fedora. Primarily, that'll be metadata going in there. And I'll talk about indexing in a little more detail shortly. And then that metadata comes from Solr into the Blacklight user interface, which I showed, which is what the end user consumes there. The guts of it down below, well, how are we going to get this content out to AWS? We're still exploring a couple solutions there. You see in the replication box in the bottom left. Either we'll just use straight up AWS data sync, which seems fine so far for now. It's basically like a mirror. And there's a lot of companies that provide mirroring technology. So this is AWS's solution for that. And so that seems to be a reasonable candidate, or we may use something a little more tuned to NetApp. We have NetApp on-prem is our network storage provider. And so there are, I think, flavors of Amazon's FSx specific to NetApp. And so we will explore that as well to see if that buys us anything. But I think maybe vanilla data sync may be good. And so we imagine that all this stuff's going to live in S3 in terms of the Fedora 6 OCFL resources. I think a lot of people have already tried OCFL and S3. Seems okay to us so far. And so we'll probably have maybe a bucket for derivatives, a bucket for the actual OCFL tree. And for the masters, the vast majority of our masters are never accessed in real time. And there are some that are. And so that gets to an interesting complication in terms of making sure we can maintain access to the public to those. But for the most part, we envision quickly life cycling all of our masters out to the cheapest storage, which looks like to me is Glacier Deep Archive in the AWS stack. And so that's our intent. Use Amazon CloudFront kind of in the middle there, just as a file delivery mechanism to provide caching and speed up for file delivery. And then we do have IIIF in there, which provides image delivery from JPEG 2000 derivatives. So this is kind of what we're looking at implementing, and we're sort of maybe halfway. Maybe we've implemented half of this, or maybe a little more in kind of a sandbox. So we're very excited to get this going, and it seems okay so far. But of course, this is all just at the conceptual level, and we're tying things together functionally. We have started to do some scale tests for parts of this, which I'll get to in a bit. Our migration plan. So this is for how are we going to handle our existing content, our 5 million objects and 175 or so terabytes. So in terms of the objects, so these are Fedora 3 objects, data streams, right? Well, we have some cleanup to do. We're moving some data streams we no longer use, maybe consolidate some models. We've kind of, our modeling has changed a little over the years, especially for videos, as we get a lot of different kinds of videos. We'll use the standard Fedora migration tool that goes from 3 to 6 to generate a Fedora 6 OCFL structure from the Fedora 3 objects and data streams just sitting on disk. We've tried this a lot over the last year. And I think got it to a state that we're happy with in terms of configuration. Uh, we use the Fedora, the validation tool to validate the migration, and then probably we'll do this migration on-prem and then just move the OCFL tree out to AWS, or maybe shove that also through data sync. So that's still to be determined. But I don't see an issue there. We've already kind of tested out mirroring through data sync, and we've even tried a migration out in AWS. So that's an option too, just running the migration tool right out there. But probably we'll do that part on-prem. And then you start up Fedora 6 on the generated OCFL tree, and then it chews away, taking some time indexing all that into the database. Our binaries is a bit of a more interesting story because we modeled in Fedora 3, we modeled our binaries as external content, which I think gets interesting in terms of how you're going to do this migration. That's probably a presentation in and of itself. And so all of our masters and most of our derivatives are modeled as type E or R in Fedora 3, external or redirect. And so Fedora is not actively managing them from the perspective of the of how Fedora manages these things. It just holds the link. And so when you migrate that to Fedora 6, you're not migrating the binary, you're migrating the link to the binary. So that's an interesting wrinkle. And then there may be a bit of rewiring some of our data stream, the links to these data streams, just to make sure they're still accessible. Here's an example of how we modeled a book in Fedora 3, a book on the left and a page on the right. And so there's masters and derivatives there on the page object on the right. We have mostly TIFFs for book masters. Everything bolded is external to Fedora 3. And so you see most of this is type E external. And Fedora 3 is just managing the link. Our overview of the migration, where we're using the migration validation tools, is shown at the top there. We have about 5 million objects. They have about 5 data streams each. So we're talking about 27 million or so data streams. We plan on using archival groups because we like the idea of keeping these things organized in sort of an object model. And so for that, you'll get one OCFL object per Fedora 3 object, as opposed to one OCFL object per data stream. So this I think works for us. I know people use atomic model as well. That seems fine too. But for us, I think we kind of like the archival groups approach. And so if you explode this all out, you get about five files per OCFL object, and 3 or 4 OCFL files for data stream. If it's an external data stream, you get 3 files generated in OCFL. If it's a regular one, you get 4. And so we're looking at about 100 plus million files. And so we ran into file handle and inode issues on this in the past. I think others reported that as well. In terms of processing time, we're kind of splitting this up into about 10, 15 batches just to make it easier to manage. And overall processing time, this is kind of combined across, if you sum it across all batches. So for our whole repository, and we've done this a couple times. So it's looking like it'll be maybe a couple weeks to migrate. So that's the Fedora migrate tool. A couple weeks of just straight CPU time, and then usually we spend some time reviewing it offline to make sure it looks okay. So that gets you about 4 weeks calendar time. Validation, running the validation tool is about a week. Fixity checks on the binaries. Of course, this is probably we'll do that independent because our content's external. So that's looking like it may be 3-6 weeks for a copy of it to check all the checksums and all our masters. And then to index that, so this is indexing into the Fedora 6 database, takes also about 3 weeks. And so, it's going to be a couple months to do all this. And we're not even really migrating to binaries, right? That's the kicker for all this because it's external. We're just migrating the object structures. Here's an example of what you get when you migrate a Fedora 3 still image out on the right there. The bottom right is what it looks like in Fedora 3. And on the left is the OCFL generated subtree from the migration tool. And so you see if you pick like our master data stream on the bottom right, so you'll see 3 files of master on the left. You get the one on the kind of the bottom, master tilde FCR desk. That's the actual one that holds the link, I think. And then there's a couple of metadata data streams up in the middle there. So that's how you get 3 or 4 files per data stream and generated OCFL. Here are our migration configuration parameters. I'm not going to go through each one, but the typical ones are at the bottom, but the ones that are interesting for us are migrating to head only because we have a lot of internal metadata stream versions, which we don't care about keeping. We're not going to run checksum from Fedora directly since we'll do that independently because the binaries are external. Resume, I think, is a critical flag because these are long-running processes and we've seen interruptions. And extensions, I think we have some internal type XML data streams. So this -x flag is nice. So then you get files which actually have a .xml extension. Otherwise, you don't. This is an example of you have several versions in Fedora 3. Like here's an example of Dublin Core or DMD index is one of our metadata index data streams. On the left is the Fedora 3 audit record, where there's a couple versions. So on the right, you see you get and this is what OCFL is designed for. It works great for it. But for us, so many of our changes to the Fedora 3 objects were just little metadata changes. And so we're not interested in keeping those, just the head. And so this will greatly simplify or streamline our generated OCFL content. So that's for existing stuff. And so back to this architecture diagram. So what are we going to do for new stuff coming in? That's the ingest processing on the top left there. And so for that, this is conceptually what it's going to look like. Where the current workflow is listed on the top left. Oh, I'm sorry, on the top row is our current processing workflow, which is that content is digitized and we don't actually, another team digitizes them. We get the digitized artifacts, and from that we generate derivatives, grab metadata from our ILS, locate binaries in the correct place, build some object structures, and the end result of all this. And again, this is code that's been in place for a long time. The end result is a Fedora 3 Foxmol file. And so for now, we think we're probably going to keep that, even if we're not going to run Fedora 3. We'll just use it sort of as an intermediate format. And then on the bottom row, take that and convert that to Fedora 6 resources, probably using the existing migrate tool, and just run it on those as needed, either daily or whatever's a convenient time. And then from that, we'll locate those resources in the existing OCFL root, copy over the binaries using probably data sync, and then use the Fedora 6 sideloading API to load the resources in there. And so this will retain Fedora 3 Foxmol as an intermediate format, but it'll save us having to kind of rewrite all the logic we have for pre-ingest processing. And so we do still plan to do that, but at least we can get up to Fedora 6 and in the cloud out the door. And then as a task later on, work on probably rewriting our pre-ingest from the ground up, maybe in some cloud native technologies. For indexing, and this is indexing into Solr, not into Fedora 6, because Fedora 6, of course, indexes things into its own database, and we'll use Postgres for that. But in this context, we're talking about indexing into Solr for the purpose of making this available to Blacklight for search and display. And so here is what we're kind of converging on something like this, but it's still a bit in flux. And so we'll have Fedora 6 with Camel Toolbox out in an EC2 server. All the typical CRUD actions are going to go to Fedora. On the bottom, you'll see where all the binaries and OCFL structure live, as I talked about before. So in the middle there, we're writing our own custom code to grab data from Fedora and transform it to produce a Solr add document. And essentially, this is kind of what gsearch does in Fedora 3. I am curious to hear how others have handled this problem. For us, we're writing code that will hit Fedora, that'll get a notification from Fedora 6 on actions through Camel Toolbox. It'll go grab the files it needs from derivatives and probably metadata from our object in OCFL, transform that. That's the transformer there. And then update it to, we have a couple cores in Solr on the right there. One is targeted for high-level search, and the other one is targeted for page-level search. And then Solr will be in its own EC2 server. So we're thinking of something like this. What we're not sure about is we played a lot in the middle there on trying to do this in a serverless approach, and we're running into all kinds of limits regarding timeouts and load capacity at the Lambda level. And so there's a good chance we'll probably just host this on an EC2 server and maybe spin it up on demand, or maybe use an ECS containerized solution. And we'll also probably look to save all the Solr add docs that we generate out on S3. I think I could thank Damian Villanova for that tip. That seems useful, so we don't have to regenerate those if we need to reindex everything. So this is a work in progress, but it's looking good. It's kind of very interesting to work on. A lot of interesting pieces in here. So future directions is we still need to design Fedora 6 replication. For Fedora 3, we actually have 3 Fedora 3s running. We sort of have a writable Fedora 3 and then 2 sort of read-only Fedora 3s. So we can locate these things in different secure subnets in our stack. And so to accomplish that, we kind of do our own content replication between the Fedoras, Fedora 3s. And so we are curious to figure out how we should do this in Fedora 6. The scaling part from the application side, I think, is reasonably well known. How we're going to handle the data is a bit, we still have to figure that out if we want to kind of replicate OCFL trees or anything like that or what. So we'll probably want to do something there. Rewrite pre-ingest and cloud native, I mentioned. We're also going to eventually locate one of our copy masters in another cloud provider, maybe Google or Microsoft, or maybe even one of the just straight up storage providers like Wasabi or Backblaze. And then long term, maybe it's possible we'll reorganize all our binaries in OCFL. And so that's sort of the kicker here, is that this migration is really just for the object definitions and structures, not the binaries themselves. They're all still external to Fedora 6. And so we won't yet get to be able to leverage the OCFL packaging for that. And so when and how to do that is a good question. I think we'd like to do that, but we still have to look at that. And that'll involve moving around millions of files. Finally, probably would like to do some kind of cloud deposit mechanism. And then there's a lot of Gen AI applications. I'm sure everyone's probably already sick of hearing about that, but a lot of things I think we can do here for that as well. So that's our presentation. Here's a link to all of our products that I mentioned, and that's where we are. So anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Doran. Yeah, John, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's a great presentation. Thanks, Doran. I just picked up on one thing you mentioned, your use of archival groups, which is something we've chosen to go with as well. I was just curious, really, if you had any comments, thoughts, experiences, good or bad, to share. As I understand it, the archival group's like a Fedora construct on top of OCFL. But I think similar to you, we were drawn to the fact that they keep everything together on disk. So it's slightly more, I guess, human readable if you were to just look at what's in the file system.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, John. And that was, I think, our main motivation as well, is because it keeps things in an organized way. And to me, the big thing is in a human parsable way, which is part of the point of OCFL. Yeah. And so if you don't do that, then you end up with data streams essentially in files all over the place, which could work better for some architectures. I know there are scalability challenges some people reported, maybe it was Peter, on archival groups. For our use case, that's not an issue because we kind of sort of have maybe a more moderate level of access and new ingest. And so for us, it made, I think, more sense to go archival groups.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's good to know. I think similar, we're keeping versioning to a minimum, and scaling wise, we've not run into any issues yet. But again, we've kept it fairly small. So I've just got one eye to the future in terms of when we're dealing with much bigger objects, how that might be an issue. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, interested to hear how it goes. Yeah, it's still emerging times, I think.
Mm. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. We probably have time for about one more question if there is. Feel free to use Q&A or raise your hand. Yeah, Josh.
Hey, Doran, that was great. I love the diagrams, really informative and very helpful presentation. I think we have a lot in common with your approach. We're not yet moving to Fedora 6, but we're starting to think about it now that we're finally getting everything into 4. I had a question about the the preservation copy that you keep in the cloud, and that AWS storage. I forget the name of it, but it's the thing that manages the storage tier for you, the data lifecycle manager. So you're keeping a copy of the master in your data center, and then this other copy in S3 is sort of a second copy, and basically that data lifecycle manager will just move it into Glacier when it sees that it's not being accessed. Is that basically what that's doing?
Correct. Yeah. So we'll have actually we have a couple copies on-prem, but in terms of that, the sync stuff will get it out to S3, but not directly to Glacier. And then you can use Lifecycle Manager, and you can set it, configure different ways. We haven't fully explored it yet, but it'll either do it based on last time access, it'll move things over to Glacier, or you should be able to, I'm assuming, and I'm sure the AWS guys will pipe up. You should be able to immediately send it all to Glacier if you want, which is probably what we'll do, because the vast majority is never accessed. And so it doesn't make sense to me to even have that wait around. But you can define your policies in Lifecycle Manager to be most recently accessed versus at a variety of levels, or shove it all there, to my understanding.
Okay.
And so it's only going to come out of there, probably we'll pull it out to check it maybe a couple times a year, fix it, do independent checks. But otherwise, we don't imagine having to pull it out of there.
Just quickly, does that system depend on those being external files, or could you, is that copy that's in AWS, that's not an OCFL object anymore? Is that right? It's just the external files that you're pointing out to, correct?
It is in our architecture because we elected to model them as external in Fedora 3, and that's relationships preserved in the migration to 6. So yeah, in our case it is. And so we'll probably rewire. That was when I was talking about rewiring one of our links for preservation. That could be that one, right? So if the link is going to change, I don't think it would. It's just when you access something in Glacier, you just don't get it right away. You have to, there's a period of latency until you get it back, right? So, but yeah, nominally it's outside of the OCFL directory. If we move it in, then you should be able to do similar strategies within OCFL. We haven't really explored that, but it could be difficult since everything is hashed, right? But you should be able to, I would imagine, lifecycle things that have not been accessed in a while within the OCFL subtree. I would think theoretically you should be able to lifecycle it over to something like Glacier, also, if you wanted to save costs.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh.
Hey.